The wind shrieked like a wounded beast across the vast, unforgiving plains, shaking every loose shingle on Silas Whitmore's aging ranch house inside. The old floor groaned beneath his boots as he stood by the kitchen window, cradling a forgotten mug of cooling coffee out beyond the glass. Dusk was being devoured by a storm thick with rain and shadow. For 8 long years, not a single stranger had crossed his threshold uninvited, and he liked it that way. Silence, solitude, and distance had been his most faithful companions. Then came the sound, faint at first, but unmistakable, of hooves pounding through the mud-soaked earth. Silas stiffened. Through the watery veil pouring from the eaves, he saw 7 riders push through the storm, their shapes dark and hunched beneath heavy cloaks. They moved with urgency, but not panic. Women, all of them, not drifting victims of misfortune, but riders with intent, too tightly clustered, too composed, too synchronized. Something about them chilled him more than the storm ever could. He set his mug down carefully. His fingers twitched toward the rifle hanging above the fireplace, then stopped. They weren't outlaws or common thieves, but the way they approached, silent and deliberate, set every survival instinct screaming. The lead figure dismounted first, her auburn hair clinging to her pale face, her torn dress betraying wealth beneath the wear. She walked with the poise of a woman used to opening doors without knocking doubt behind her. The other 6 remained mounted, obscured by wide-brimmed hats and layers of wet fabric. But their posture revealed hard truths. These were women carved by harsh roads and darker memories. "Mister," the auburn-haired one called, her voice rising above the howling wind. "We need shelter. Just for the night." Silas didn't move. He watched from behind the safety of the glass. 7 women, alone, riding fine, well-fed horses through land and weather that would break most men. It didn't add up. Desperation didn't ride in on fresh hooves and polished tack. He thought of his father's old words, "A man's worth is tested by how he treats those with nothing to offer." But his father had never met women who stared through glass like they already owned the place. The woman knocked again, harder this time. "Sir, please, we won't make it to town before the storm buries us." His boots echoed across the wooden floor as he approached the door, hesitating at the handle. 8 years alone had taught him people meant only trouble, heartache, risk. Yet even now, with every muscle urging him to keep the door bolted, he couldn't leave them out there to freeze. Mercy, even when inconvenient, had a grip on him. Behind the door, he heard soft voices whispering, murmuring just low enough to be unreadable, plotting, perhaps, or simply holding one another together. He didn't know it then. But the moment his hand turned that handle, the life he knew would begin to unravel. His principles would be tested, his trust betrayed, and he would learn, too late, that some storms don't come from the sky. They walkin' on defeat, cloaked in beauty and lies. He opened the door. Wind and water rushed in like a feral thing. The auburn-haired woman stood before him, soaked and shivering, but her green eyes shimmered not with gratitude, but something colder, calculation. Behind her, the others had already dismounted. Without a word, they led their horses toward the barn as though they knew exactly where to go. He hadn't offered, and they hadn't asked. "Thank you," the woman said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "I'm Magnolia Voss. These are my traveling companions." Silas caught the pause, brief but heavy. Companions said more by what it left out. He glanced past her to the others. They moved like a unit, practiced and precise. "Soldiers, not strays. Where you headed?" he asked, closing the door behind her but letting his hand rest near the rifle. "California." She answered smoothly, shedding her soaked coat. The dress underneath clung to her frame. "Rich fabric despite its damage. My late husband left me some land out there. We're all recently widowed. We decided to make the journey together. Safer that way." One by one, the others entered. Each woman was beautiful in a way that made the room feel smaller, younger, older, taller, leaner, but all of them had that same air, tired, watchful, dangerous. A blonde who looked barely 25, her eyes far too old for her face. A brunette with rough, scarred hands that hinted at violence, not sewing. A redhead with a smile too bright and eyes that missed nothing. Their lips thanked him, but their gazes roamed, taking in every detail of his modest home with sharp, assessing flicks. They spread out around the living room, never standing too close, never blocking one another's exits. Their movements were subtle, but strategic, like chess pieces sliding into place. "We're mighty grateful for your kindness," said the youngest, her lashes fluttering, her smile sweet. "Been riding for days, haven't seen another soul out there." Silas didn't respond. He had seen dust rising on the horizon just a few hours ago. Riders, no doubt, tailing them. Someone was following these women, and they knew it. He offered, casually, "Coffee's still warm. Help yourselves, I'll go check on the horses." "No need," Magnolia replied quickly. "They're taken care of. We know how to manage ourselves." Another warning bell rang in his head. These weren't damsels in distress. They weren't even just travelers with bad luck. They were women with a purpose, and they hadn't stumbled upon his ranch by chance. He stood in the center of his own home, suddenly feeling like the guest. Something had shifted. The storm outside had brought more than wind and rain. It had brought secrets in silk and danger, in perfume, and Silas Whitmore, who'd spent 8 years escaping the world, was about to find out that sometimes it finds you anyway, wearing a widow's smile and eyes full of ruin. In this part of the territory, refusing help with horses, especially in weather like this, was unheard of. But Silas Whitmore knew better than to mistake courtesy for safety. The way Magnolia's fingers kept brushing against something concealed in the folds of her dress made it clear she was armed, and not shy about using whatever she had tucked away. He moved to the kitchen, calm and deliberate, pouring coffee with steady hands even as every instinct in him screamed that something wasn't right. Through the fogged-up window, he caught sight of their horses inside his barn. Handsome animals, dressed in high-end tack, but they were lathered in sweat, foam clinging to their mouths. Those horses hadn't been ridden gently, they'd been pushed hard, like they were running from the devil himself, not merely drifting west to California on some widow's pilgrimage. "Fine place you got here," the brunette said, her fingers trailing along his curtains like she was appraising goods at a dry goods store. "Must get awful lonely, a man living out here all on his own." "I prefer it that way," Silas said, passing out tin cups filled with coffee. "Keeps things simple." The women exchanged glances, sharp, deliberate looks that didn't need words to speak volumes. Silas didn't miss it. He already knew they weren't here by accident, and they weren't planning on riding out quietly in the morning either. Thunder cracked through the sky like a whip. Magnolia stepped toward the window and stared into the storm, but her posture told Silas she wasn't focused on the lightning. No, she was watching the road. That tight tension in her shoulders, the flick of her eyes, it was clear. She was expecting someone dangerous. And when those men did arrive, and they would arrive, Silas understood he'd be caught in the middle of something meaner than the storm thundering overhead. What he didn't know yet was that the moment he opened his door, he'd already chosen a side. By dawn, he'd either be lying dead on his own floorboards, or he'd come to realize that the most dangerous predators don't always come with snarling teeth. Sometimes they show up wearing silk and sorrow. The mantel clock struck 9, each chime slicing through the thick silence like a warning bell. The women had made themselves at home, draped across his furniture like royalty, but their eyes never stopped moving, always scanning, always calculating. Magnolia remained by the window, still as a predator watching for prey. Silas took his seat, cup in hand, and let the silence hang a moment before speaking. "Tell me about your husbands," he said, his voice even. "What kind of men were they?" The words hit like a gunshot. The blonde pearl flinched so hard she almost spilled her drink. The redhead's smile cracked for the first time since they'd walked in. Magnolia turned from the window, slowly, and the look she gave him could have frozen the blood in a man's veins. "Dead," she said, coldly. "The kind best left buried." Silas gave a small nod, his gaze drifting from one face to the next. "Funny thing," he said, "most widows around here wear black. Most travel with kin or church folk. Most don't carry enough iron under the dresses to take on a posse." The brunette, Clara, shifted uncomfortably. A flash of metal caught his eye beneath her skirt. "A woman alone has to protect herself," she said. Voice clipped, 7 women, Silas corrected. 7 pretty women, riding expensive horses, wearing city-made dresses and packing heat like bounty hunters. That's not a bunch of mourners heading west, that's something else entirely. The youngest of them rose shakily to her feet. She'd been quiet the whole time, barely a whisper in the room. Now, her hands trembled and tears ran unchecked down her face. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "I can't keep lying." "Sit down, Rose," Magnolia said, her voice sharp as shattered glass. But Rose shook her head, inching toward the door. "He's been good to us. We were supposed to—" Her voice broke. She couldn't finish. The room went ice cold. Every pair of eyes zeroed in on Rose, some furious, some frightened. Silas's fingers moved slowly toward the rifle leaning beside his chair. Something cold and precise was clicking into place in his mind. "What were you supposed to do, Rose?" he asked softly. Before she could answer, the wind outside shifted. Hoofbeats, fast and heavy, cut through the storm. Multiple riders, pushing their mounts hard despite the pounding rain. Magnolia spun back to the window, her face drained of color. "They found us," she whispered. Chaos followed. In an instant, every woman sprang into action, weapons materializing. From hidden seams and folds like magic, derringers, hunting knives, a sawed-off shotgun yanked from beneath a coat. It was a small armory hidden beneath lace and charm. "Who found you?" Silas demanded, rising. Magnolia turned to him, and for the first time, the mask of control cracked. Fear bled through. "Men who don't take kindly to being robbed," she said. "Men who've been tracking us for 3 days, across the territories." The truth hit Silas like a hammer. They weren't widows. They were thieves, con artists, and they'd brought a band of vengeful men straight to his doorstep. "How much did you steal?" he asked, voice like gravel. Magnolia didn't blink. "Enough to make them very, very angry." Outside, the voices grew louder, shouting. Curses hurled into the wind, threats, thick with rage. Rose sobbed openly now, and the other women checked their weapons with the smooth, instinctive movements of people who'd done more than just threatened violence in the past. But there was one thing. None of them knew. They didn't know who Silas had been before he became a ghost on a ranch. Before the beard, before the solitude, before the lies. They didn't know that buried under the dust and quiet of 8 long years was a man who once made killers nervous, and if he decided they were worth saving, just maybe they'd all live to see morning. The storm howled louder. The riders reached the gate, and Silas Whitmore reached for the man he used to be. The yard crawled with shadows, demons loosed from hell itself, through rain-smeared windows. Silas counted at least 8 figures, maybe more, emerging from the storm. Their leader, a towering brute in a black duster, dismounted with the force of thunder and barked commands that sliced through the wind like steel. "Fan out. Check the barn. If they're here, I want them alive." Magnolia clutched Silas's arm, her nails digging in with raw desperation. "Please," she whispered. "Stripped now of charm and bravado. If they find us, we're dead." Silas looked into her eyes and saw a terror he recognized, one born not from imagination, but memory. The kind of fear people carry after witnessing what men do when revenge poisons their blood. He'd seen that look before in the broken stares of survivors, and in the mirror when guilt clung to his skin like smoke. "What exactly did you take from them?" he asked. "Money," Clara said. "From a poker game in Deadwood. A lot of it." "How much is a lot?" Silas pressed. "Enough to buy a small town," Pearl murmured, voice hollow. In the corner, Rose was trembling violently, rocking back and forth as if she could somehow escape into herself. "They're going to do things to us," she moaned, "worse than death, things that make hell sound kind." Then came the pounding, a sound like a battering ram soaked in menace, slamming against the front door. A voice followed, low, guttural, and soaked with the certainty of someone used to getting his way. "Open up, we know you're in there." Silas turned from the door and studied the 7 women, really studied them, past the beauty and bravado, past the weapons hidden beneath traveling cloaks, past the stories that didn't line up. He saw something that yanked a piece of his soul into the open. His sister's face flickered in Magnolia's desperate expression. His sister, who had screamed for help and been answered with silence. Would he turn these women over thieves, liars, fugitives, or protect them? Knowing full well it might cost his life, his silence would decide whether anyone inside that room lived to see the morning. He reached for his rifle but stopped short. Instead, he strode to the hearth, dropped to one knee, and pried up a loose floorboard. Beneath it, nestled in dust and memory, lay a hidden cache of firepower that dwarfed the women's pitiful collection. Military-grade rifles, full magazines, and something else that made Magnolia go pale. "You're no rancher," she breathed. "Used to be a U.S. Marshal," Silas said, snapping around into a Winchester. "Before I realized the law ain't worth a damn when it serves the wrong kind of men." The door exploded inward with a crack that shook the walls. Splinters flew like angry bees. The first man through was a human battering ram, tall, scarred, with the dead eyes of a butcher. Behind him came the rest, each one tougher than the last, faces chiseled from cruelty, hearts hollowed out by violence. These were the kinds of men who'd trade their mother for a warm fire and a jug of rye. "Well, well," came a voice like gravel under boot. The leader stepped inside, rain dripping off his wide-brimmed hat. "Silas Whitmore, heard you'd turn soft out here. Playing farmer." Silas's voice was calm, clipped. "Cormac Doolan. Should have known they'd send you." Cormac's smirk was full of venom. "Still cleaning up other people's messes." "Hud, step aside. Hand over the ladies, and we'll be on our way." "They asked for shelter," Silas said, planting himself like a mountain before the group of women. "I gave it." Cormac chuckled. "Slow and cruel. Your word don't mean much when it's given to a bunch of liars and thieves. They stole from the wrong people, Silas. People who don't forgive. Then maybe those people shouldn't have been gambling with what they couldn't afford to lose." Silas shot back. "You want them. Come and take them." A silence fell, heavy and hot with danger. 8 armed men facing down 1 aging lawman and 7 desperate women. A fool's odds, a suicide stand. But the storm outside now seemed quiet compared to the one brewing in that room. What Cormac didn't know was that Silas Whitmore had a secret, one he'd kept buried for 8 long years, a secret that was about to turn this home into a battlefield, and this standoff into something far messier than a simple bloodbath. Cormac's men had fanned out through the house, weapons drawn, eyes narrowed on the women huddled behind Silas. The air stretched thin, stretched silent, like the pause before lightning splits the sky. "You know," Cormac drawled, pulling off his gloves finger by finger, "I heard stories about why you really quit the Marshal Service, about Silver Creek." Silas's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "About a bank job," Cormac continued, relishing the tension. "About money that vanished before it ever made it back to the vault. Funny, ain't it? A simple lawman ends up with enough to buy land like this." Magnolia's gaze drilled into Silas's back, shocked, curious, maybe even a little afraid. "You're casting your line in the wrong waters," Silas replied, voice low and deadly. "Maybe," Cormac said, motioning to his men, guns raised as one. "But it seems to me you and these ladies are cut from the same cloth. You're all thieves. Only difference is you got away with it." A sob cracked from Rose. Pearl's hand gripped her derringer so hard her knuckles went pale. Clara's eyes darted, counting angles, exits, weapons. Outside, the thunder rumbled like distant war drums. Inside, justice and vengeance balanced on a hair trigger, and Silas Whitmore, once a lawman, now something far more dangerous, stood between the devils and the damned, knowing that when the first shot rang out, the ghosts of his past would rise, and not everyone in that room would walk away alive. Asterisk, asterisk. Advantage might have been on their side, but it was clear that the redhead, Faye, was practically thrilled by the promise of bloodshed. Yet it was Magnolia who stunned them all. She stepped forward, brushing past Silas's protective stance to confront Cormac face to face. Her voice was low but unwavering. "The money we took, it wasn't from some harmless card game. It was payment for girls, young girls, sold like cattle." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Even Cormac's men shifted uncomfortably, their bravado crumbling under the weight of her words. "We didn't rob gamblers," Magnolia went on, her voice rising with steel. we took from men who profit off shattered lives, who destroy innocence for coin." Cormarmac sneered, but there was something different in his tone now, something unsure. "That's a touching little tale," he said. "Doesn't change the fact that you took something that wasn't yours. It wasn't theirs either." Clara said coldly, stepping forward, her weapon no longer hidden. Every dollar was bought with a child's scream. Silas studied the women anew. They weren't just thieves, they were something far more dangerous, vigilantes. Women who had stepped into the darkness because the law had turned its back. Their weapons training, the precision, the planning, it all made sense now. They weren't fleeing toward California. They were running toward redemption. "Doesn't matter to me," Cormarmac muttered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. "A job's a job. Money's money, even blood money," Silas asked. "Especially blood money. Pays better." And that was the moment Silas made his decision, not just to shield these women, but to stand against the very thing that had haunted him since Silver Creek, the evil he'd failed to stop then, the rot that had driven him to solitude and silence. He moved with a swiftness that belied his age, the rifle in his hands speaking first. The shot slammed into Cormarmac's shoulder, spinning him to the ground in a heap of rage and pain. "Anyone else want to argue about the morality of child trafficking?" Silas growled, cocking his rifle again. The air snapped with tension. Cormarmac's men now faced not only a hardened former lawman, but 7 women who had already shown they would kill without hesitation. The odds had flipped in a heartbeat, and the storm outside suddenly seemed gentler than the fury building within those walls. The gunfight erupted like a lightning strike. Caught off guard, the men faltered. That hesitation cost them dearly. Magnolia's derringer spat fire, the man by the door collapsing before he could even raise his gun. Pearl and Clara moved like wraiths, graceful and lethal, each bullet placed with intent. Faye laughed as she fired, a wild, haunting sound that sent chills down even Silas's spine. Rose, the youngest, huddled in the corner, sobbing as chaos erupted around her. Silas, though, was a storm of his own, his rifle barking again and again, each shot a judgment. Years in the wilderness hadn't dulled his aim, they'd refined it. These men had come here to retrieve their cargo. They'd leave in coffins. "Fall back," Cormarmac roared, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Back to the horses. But outside, the world had vanished into a swirling tempest. Inside, the ranch house had become a battlefield, its defenders fueled not just by fury, but by purpose. One of Cormarmac's men grabbed Rose, dragging her up and pressing a blade to her throat. "Drop your weapons, or she dies." Then Silas saw it, barely visible beneath the man's tattered sleeve. A brand on his wrist, the same mark he'd seen years ago in Silver Creek, a symbol carved into the flesh of a dead girl, a child who hadn't lived long enough to understand what was done to her. "You recognize it, don't you?" Magnolia called out, noticing Silas's reaction. "You've seen it before." He had. Too many times, on victims whose cases vanished, on corpses dismissed as runaways or suicides, on evidence that never made it to trial, the mark of a network that treated human beings as merchandise, bought and sold behind closed doors. "Silver Creek," he whispered. The pieces clicked into place like a gun being loaded. "That's why the case vanished. That's why everything got buried." Clara nodded grimly, her weapon steady. "Your people were in on it. Judges, sheriffs, politicians, all bought and paid for." The man holding Rose pressed the knife tighter against her throat, his hand trembling. "I said drop your damn weapons." But instead of surrendering, Silas did something that shocked them all. He gently placed his rifle on the ground and reached inside his shirt, withdrawing a small, gleaming badge, not the old marshal's star, but something else entirely. Cormarmac's eyes widened in horror. "Federal Marshal," Silas said quietly, "Special Division. I've been hunting your people for 8 years." The storm outside howled, but inside, you could hear a pin drop. The whole recluse routine. Magnolia breathed. "It was a cover." "Deep cover," Silas confirmed, his eyes locked on the man with the knife, waiting for the right moment to strike at the core. "You bastard," Cormarmac hissed. "You've been playing a long game." 8 years, Silas said again. 8 years of watching, listening, tracing your web, your buyers, your safe houses, your shipping routes. every name, every partner, every politician who took a cut. The man with the knife began to shake, sweat pouring from his face. He wasn't just staring down death, he was staring down history, a reckoning that had finally come. "Let her go," Silas said, voice low, calm, final. "And I'll make sure you live long enough to testify against who?" The man spat. "Everyone," Silas said, "every judge who sold their soul, every sheriff who buried a file, every broker who touched this filth. I've got 8 years of names. You're just the start. Documentation hidden where no superior would ever uncover it. You're lying," the man growled. Silas smiled, and it was a smile as cold as winter steel. "Try me." The tremor in the man's knife betrayed him. His confidence crumbled, and that single heartbeat of hesitation was all Rose needed. With unexpected ferocity, she drove her elbow into his gut and slipped free of his grasp, leaving him exposed and unshielded in a room full of furious women, each of them armed and past the point of mercy. What happened next would forever haunt Cormac's dreams, though not for long. The man who'd held Rose hostage was dead before his knees buckled. 7 guns fired in unison. A single, merciless thunderclap. His body hit the ground already lifeless, transformed in that moment into a brutal lesson about underestimating women with nothing left to lose. The sound of those shots thundered through the house like divine wrath, final and unforgiving. Cormac, gasping and bloodied, stared in disbelief at the broken wreckage of what had once been his crew, Silas's living room. Once a sanctuary of quiet solitude was now soaked in blood and strewn with bodies. Only 2 of Cormac's men remained alive. They were wounded, barely conscious, and staring in horror at the federal badge that now glinted in Silas's hand like a death sentence. "You played us," Cormac rasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You were federal this whole time." "No," Silas replied, calm as a hangman's breath. "You were filth this whole time. I was just doing my job." Magnolia lowered her smoking derringer, her green eyes appraising Silas with something near respect. 8 years, she said quietly. 8 years watching girls vanish. 8 years building a case. Silas nodded once. "That takes more than patience," she added. "It takes rage," he corrected. "A kind that doesn't burn out. It burns deeper, controlled, focused, permanent." Rose was no longer crying. She stood over the man who had nearly ended her life, her young face no longer marked by fear or grief, but by something stronger, something cleaner. "How many girls?" she asked, her voice a blade. "What?" Cormac wheezed. "How many girls did your people sell? How many innocents paid for your dirty wealth?" He tried to laugh, but blood choked the sound. "You think killing us changes anything? You think this ends it?" "No," Silas said, kneeling beside him. "This is just the beginning. I wasn't just watching all these years. I was documenting names, dates, transactions, locations. I mapped out every corner of your operation." "Where?" Cormac demanded, his voice nothing but venom and blood. "Safe," Silas said, voice flat. "In federal hands. And now, thanks to you showing up tonight, confirming everything, admitting the money's origin, flaunting those brands on your wrists, I have everything I need." Clara moved to the window, scanning the landscape. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "For U.S., Magnolia murmured, almost afraid to believe it. "And for them?" Clara asked, nodding toward the dead and the dying. "They fall," Silas said. "Every last one. Federal marshals are already taking down safe houses across 3 territories. By sunrise, the network will be ashes and shadows." The storm outside had finally begun to loosen its grip. Through the shattered door, light broke the sky, painting the horizon with soft promises of hope. Inside, among the ruin and gunpowder, 7 women and 1 federal marshal sat in the silence that follows war. "What about us?" Pearl asked after a long pause. "We're still thieves. We still took money that didn't belong to us. Evidence." "Money," Silas corrected, "seized in the course of an investigation. You didn't rob a bank. You helped serve a warrant." Faye let out a breath that almost became a laugh, clearer, lighter. "So what you're saying, we're heroes now. You're survivors," Silas said. "And sometimes that's the same thing." But as sunlight spread deeper into the room, exposing every bloodstain, every broken thing, Silas wondered if survival could ever be that simple. He had seen the price of victory. It was written in their eyes, in the air itself. Rose, steady now, asked, "What happens to us?" Silas set about cleaning his rifle, slow and deliberate. "You disappear. New identities, new territories, new lives. The government can handle that." "Together?" Magnolia asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "Your choice. But whoever you decide to be, you can't be who you were. The women who came here last night are gone. What leaves this house are strangers, even to themselves." Clara's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe those women needed to die." Hoofbeats approached, this time steady, organized. Everyone stiffened. But the riders came with badges and authority. A man dismounted with crisp efficiency. "Federal Marshal Williams," he said. "You signaled the operation was finished, complete and successful." Silas confirmed. "The network's destroyed. The evidence is intact. The women are under federal protection." Williams studied them each like a battlefield commander. "They'll need full identities, histories. It's costly. They've earned it." Silas said, "In blood." The marshals moved quickly, processing the scene with clinical precision, making bodies vanish, gathering every shell casing, turning a massacre into paperwork destined for some locked drawer. One by one, the women began their quiet goodbyes. Rose lingered. "The money we took," she whispered. "What really happens to it?" "What do you want to happen?" Silas asked. "There are places," she said. "Safe places for girls who've been hurt. They need help. They need protection." Silas met her gaze. "I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go." Magnolia came last. "You could have turned us in," she said. "Claimed the bounty. Lived quiet. Peace isn't something you find," Silas answered. "It's a choice. One you make every single day. Last night, I chose to stand with people trying to save lives. That's peace enough for me." "And what about you?" she asked. "What does a federal marshal do when his cover's blown?" Silas looked out over the blood-streaked boards of the house he'd called home. "Find a new mission," he said. The women mounted up, riding out beneath the rising sun, toward a life they had fought for with blood and resolve. They vanished into the wild, their names already forgotten, their pasts burned clean. Silas stood alone in the doorway, watching them disappear like smoke. 8 years of waiting had culminated in one night of reckoning. Behind him, the ranch would need to be scrubbed, rebuilt, maybe even blessed. But for the first time in a decade, he felt something unfamiliar: closure. The kind of peace that left scars behind, but made the world just a little less cruel. Because sometimes, the people who deliver justice aren't saints. They're simply the ones who have nothing left to lose. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change everything.